Hello everyone, my name is PJ and welcome back to the Void and another episode of The Hoarder. In the last session, our heroes cleared out the Sunless Citadel and destroyed the Galthias tree that was created from the corpse of Grizzletod's former first mate, Sable Darkwater. When they brought back the handkerchief that she'd made before becoming a tree, they proved their competence and trustworthiness to the Ring of Swords, and in exchange, their leader gave them a petrified leaf, which the heroes are jokingly referring to as the Leaf Stone, and are allowed to rest at their campsite for the night. While they're there, Chit spends a long time talking to the druid's leader, telling her all about the Hoarder and the Crystal Rod and about the warlock that works for the Skullcrusher Battalion, and asks her to tell him if they learn anything about the Crystal Rod or its whereabouts, which she promises to do. So the next morning, after the heavy rainfall is gone, the forest is covered in a thick blanket of fog. But head to the east our heroes did, being careful not to go straight east because the druid leader warned them that there was a hobgoblin war camp in that direction, home to the Goreclaw Marauders. So they attempt to go around by heading southeast first. As they are crossing the hills, they can hear some kind of clicking noise, followed by a whole mess of footsteps. Rather than even confront them, even acknowledge their existence, they decide to just go around, using the fog as cover. The sound passes by, and they never learn what the sounds were. They continue their journey past the hills and into the forest, and early the next morning, while Zaymod is keeping watch, a giant eagle lands on a branch above them, seemingly looking for something. It shows no hostility, but nobody in the party has speak with animals or comprehend languages or anything that can help them understand exactly what it wants. But it does seem to understand them, and actually responds both to their insults and to their compliments. But in the end, nothing really comes of their encounter with it. After deciding to ignore the giant eagle and after the entire party has woken up, they are beset upon by a small group of boars, 4 of them, that look very hungry and very vicious. Balthazar decides that breakfast has been delivered to them. They slay the boars, and one of them escapes, but that's their food for the day. Bacon. And they do end up saving a lot of it too. So they continue. Chit is intending to head northeast in order to try and get back on track. But I roll their survival check in secret and he fails, so he ends up heading straight north. And when they do that, they encounter a mountain. Now they were told that the Skullcrushers are lairing in a mountain, so naturally they immediately assume that this is that mountain, except that it's not because they're lost. It's actually Mount Houghton now. So they spend some time trying to figure out how to cross the river that separates where they are from the mountain, because they were also told that there was a river. Instead of actually trying to cross the river, though, because that would be dangerous for some of them, they instead decide to follow the river, and I ask them, which direction do you want to follow the river, left or right? They pick right, and it's a good thing they did, otherwise they would have gotten way off track. They begin following the river to the right, which is to the east, and they immediately happen upon a small village, one that looks extraordinarily familiar to Serge. It was his hometown of Grumblewood. And even though he is not welcome there at the moment, he decides that he wants to stop in and check on everybody anyway. As soon as they approach, a couple of goblins that I named Giggs and Gedge pop out of barrels with their arrows drawn. They're not going to let Serge or his party into the village. None of them are welcome there. But Chit decides to bribe them with a very valuable gemstone, and the two of them begin fighting over it, while they walk on by and go inside. None of the goblins are happy to see the PCs. They all hide in their huts and whisper about how Serge has come back. But they're not dealing with any of them. Instead, Serge heads straight for his old home, where his father was. Serge's father is an artisan by the name of Grishala. He opens the door when Serge knocks on it and is delighted to see his son returned. Confused, but delighted. He was so worried about him, and he gives him a big hug, which everyone in the party enjoys that. Who doesn't love wholesomeness? But he invites everybody in. Balthazar and Chit have to bend over in order to fit inside the house, but they all gather around a table and he makes them some homemade green tea. Except for Zaymot, who he gets him some wine. And despite Dwarves' high standards for alcohol, Zaymot enjoys it. He might have just been flattering him, but who knows. So since Serge never did, Grishala explains to the rest of the party exactly why Serge isn't welcome in the village. It is because when Serge's sorcery powers first emerged, it was when he was defending a goblin lass in the village from an orc that had come from a nearby village called Hork, claiming that he was looking for the crystal rod, and he bore the mark of the Skullcrusher battalion. When Serge tried to defend her from the orc, Serge's magical powers emerged and he cast Thunderwave, blowing him to bits. When they saw that happen, their other villagers started whispering about Serge. He's just like his foul mother, they said, who had disappeared years prior, and that the other goblins were not very fond of. Serge's mother, Snicka, was originally a member of the Gorklaw Marauders before becoming an adventurer, after she had developed her own sorcery powers. And after adventuring around for a while, she eventually settled down with Grishala and had a family, only to disappear a few years later. Serge doesn't mention this to the rest of the party, but it is part of his backstory that he was the one who witnessed her disappear. One day, a portal made of water just suddenly appeared around Snicka, snatched her up and pulled her in, only for the portal to immediately disappear. And that's why Serge's background is Haunted One. So you see, Grishala explains, it's not that he killed an orc. That's the reason that the goblins fear him and don't want him around. It's because he developed sorcery, and he reminds them of his mother. They were very afraid of her. But before he can continue the stories and the explanations, they hear screaming outside. Serge is the first one on the scene. Looking outside, he can see that an owlbear had found its way into the village and is taking advantage of the strong winds, preventing them from using their arrows against it. It kills one of the villagers, and then in the middle of the fight that ensues, it manages to kill Giggs as well. Serge attempts to use his catapult spell to launch one of his daggers at the owlbear, but it misses, and instead a wild magic surge activates and accidentally paralyzes Balthazar, so neither of them are particularly effective during the fight. Chit runs over to it and immediately tries to grapple it to the ground, which he succeeds in doing, but the owlbear manages to dodge his later attempts and even escapes his grapples a couple times. The owlbear is way stronger than Chit is. Truly, this time, it was Zaymot who shined. Not only did Zaymot have spiritual weapon now that he was level 3, and he used that to great effect, but he also had a new spell prepared that day, Inflict Wounds, which he cast at 2nd level, and since the owlbear was prone, he had advantage on the touch. He dealt 27 necrotic damage, which is almost half of this thing's health. The owlbear's body withers into a pile of flesh and a skeleton in moments. All thanks to Zaymot. But it is not Zaymot whose songs are sung that day. Rather, the goblins are very happy to see that Serge not only was on their side, but was also willing to come back to them even after they shunned him, and brought heroes along who were capable of dealing with this owlbear. Who knows what would have happened that day? were they not present. So they celebrate. They help the heroes in every way that they can. They let them stay in the village for the night. They trade with them. Chit sells all of his gems. And that night, while they're holding a funeral, burning the bodies of the 2 goblins that were killed by the owlbear, Chit has a conversation with Grizzletodd. He had let it known out loud that he had no plans of handing the highwayman over to the Hoarder at all, and that even if Dothwindle takes it from him, he's going to go and get it back, and the rest of his party is on board. Grizzletodd hears him say this. He says, "What? Are you completely daft? Listen, there is a reason that even though I am a fucking crossbow, that I am still loyal to the Hoarder. It is stupidity, it is insanity to go against the Hoarder. He's going to find you. He's going to get the highwayman, and you'd be better off getting on his good side while ye still can." Chit almost threw Grizzletodd right into the fire. But Zaymot convinces him not to. He says that Grizzletodd still has information that they do not have, and requests to hold on to him instead. So, Zaymot upgrades from a light crossbow to a heavy crossbow. Now that Chit is level 3, he has his proficiency in the smith's tools that he found in the goblin caves, and he spent that night, he pulled an all-nighter, didn't get any sleep, but he made his con save, crafting himself some bullets. So now he's got 10 bullets. And I believe Zaymot's light crossbow was passed on to Surge. Was it the Surge or Balthazar? I forget which, but it doesn't matter. So since nobody in Grumblewood knows where Overleaf is, they decide to ask in the next town over, the town of Hork, which is home to a lot of non-evil orcs who defected from the Skullcrushers. They figure that since Throgar, the orc that Surge had killed, knew about the crystal rod, somebody else there might know about it as well. So even if they don't know about Overleaf, they might get some leads. They follow the directions that they are given, heading south along the river until they come to a bridge. When they are crossing the bridge, another party is crossing the bridge from the other side, coming in their direction. They are all dressed in blue, with blue turbans and cloaks with gold lining. They each stick to one side of the bridge and are completely unwilling to both interact or to engage in combat. They have no reason to be hostile to one another, they're just minding their own business. Except when I describe this other party, consisting of a human, a dwarf, an elf, and a goblin, Surge decides that he wants to hail the goblin. And he speaks to him in Goblin. Now this is important. He speaks to the goblin in Goblin, and the goblin responds in the same language. Nobody else on either side can understand what they're saying. Because if this other goblin's party knew what he was saying, they would have stopped him. Surge asks the goblin if he knows where Overleaf is. And the other goblin responds, "You're in luck. We just came from there." And he gives Surge instructions on how to get there. So after the other party leaves, because the humans seem to imply that they were in a hurry and they kept looking behind themselves, they hurry along. And Chit decides, screw Hork, we're using these instructions to get to Overleaf as soon as we can. So they don't go to Hork. Instead, they follow the directions. And because Surge is also proficient in the orc language, he can see a bunch of signs written in blood in the orcish language, telling them to stay away, that this is Skullcrusher territory. So they avoid the border, they go around the border, and they keep going until they find this weird, large, wolf-like creature in the middle of the forest. It doesn't seem to be hostile. It's not a dire wolf, it's not a giant wolf, it's not a winter wolf, and it's not a warg. But it is a very big wolf, bear-sized, cattle-sized. But it doesn't have a wolf face. It's a very flat face with a human nose and big bat-like ears. I also tell them that it appears to be a ghost, because they can see right through it. They show no hostility to the wolf, and in fact, the wolf hovers over to them and begins acting friendly. It woof woof makes some funny barking sounds and pants and tries to lick Chit's face, but his tongue just goes right through him, and he's got this big smile on his face, and everyone's like, "Aw, what a cute big ghost puppy." Then Surge decides that he wants to try to recall to see if he knows anything about it. He has proficiency in Arcana, and he himself is a goblin whose ancestors are Fae. He succeeds, very much so. The DC for figuring out what this thing is 14. He rolls a 21. And I tell him, this thing is a Fae. You know about Fae, having lived here in the forest all your life. It's called a Yeth-hound. And it is not friendly. It is only pretending to be friendly right now. And as Surge hears this, he notices that this creature has these perfectly circular, glowing red eyes behind its facade of a smile. And as Surge begins telling his allies that this thing, they should probably try and get away from it, it begins acting sad and trying to, fool them. But they're not having none of it. Surge tells them that this thing may be a ghost and unable to hurt them now, but that's just because it's daytime. Once it hits nighttime, this thing will become corporeal, and it will try to tear them to shreds. So, they try to ignore it, and they begin walking away. The Yeth-hound follows them. They begin jogging. The Yeth-hound follows faster. They begin sprinting. The Yeth-hound follows faster. None of them are faster than the Yeth-hound, but they are intent on getting away from it. And so, the chase begins. I have everybody tell me what their constitution modifiers are, and I list them in order from lowest to highest. The person with the lowest constitution makes their constitution check first, while nobody else does. In the round after that, everyone with the lowest constitution and the second lowest constitution makes their checks next. And that goes on until everybody is rolling constitution checks every single turn, and the DC is always 10. This continues until somebody in the party hits exhaustion level 5, because that knocks your speed down to 0. There are plenty of places in the forest to hide, but not if you can't get away from your pursuer, and it's faster than all of them. Balthazar and the Yeth-hound, both at the same time, hit exhaustion level 5. They both become unable to move. The Yeth-hound is just floating there, exhausted, panting constantly, while Balthazar falls to the ground, no longer able to feel his legs. Zaymot puts down his shield, ties a rope around it, and puts Balthazar inside the bowl of the shield, using it as a sled to drag Balthazar along with them and get as far away from the exhausted Yeth-hound as they can. So, after they almost kill themselves running away from something that can't hurt them, they eventually find the riverbank that the goblin on the bridge told them about. On the other side of the riverbank is the Skullcrusher territory that they had just passed. So now they know that all they have to do is follow this river south, skipping the bridge as they were instructed, and they will reach Overleaf. They are happy to finally have a concrete route to Overleaf, but as Zaymot examines the area beyond the river, looking into the Skullcrusher territory, he sees that there is a cart accompanied by 3 orcs and being pulled by a bunch of slaves. Dwarven slaves. I tell Zaymot that he recognizes one of them, and he immediately asks, "Is it my father?" And I say, "Yes, it is." Zaymot seriously contemplates going over there right now in order to save his father. There's only 3 orcs. They could take him. But 2 of them are heavily exhausted. Chit with 2 levels and Balthazar with 5. They are not in the condition to be fighting anything. which is why, when two ghouls emerge from the riverbank, getting ready to attack the party, one of them bites a big hole in Zaymot's neck. Serge takes action. He puts a stop to the fight immediately, and he says to them, because the ghouls were speaking common when they emerged, he says to them in common, "Wait, we don't have to fight. Do you want any meat?" And he pulls out the boar meat that they had gotten the other morning. And he rolls over a 20 on his persuasion check. These are hostile creatures, and the description for conversation reactions for hostile creatures is that if you roll a 20 or more, then they will do as asked as long as no personal risk or sacrifice is involved. They're just hungry. Ghouls are always hungry for flesh. And there's flesh right there that is being handed to them that they don't have to work for. They take the boar meat and they gobble it all up with their bare hands. Raw. So they ask them, while they are eating, while they are sated, "Do you know where Overleaf is?" Now these ghouls are undead elves. They're actually from Overleaf, they say. They were murdered by the Skullcrushers and were going to be brought to the Skullcrusher territory to have their heads mounted on pikes. But their bodies fell off the cart and into the riverbank, where they've been bloated and full of water ever since. They don't remember the details since it surrounded their deaths. But they tell them, and they point in this direction. They point and they say, "Overleaf is that way." So they immediately leave. They let the ghouls eat their boar meat, and they immediately head in the direction that the ghouls told them to go. So in the end of the day, bacon saved Balthazar's bacon. They follow the trail exactly. I roll Chit's survival check, and he succeeds. They follow the trail perfectly, and at the end of the session, they reach Overleaf.